August 17, 1943. Platform 9, Grand Central Station, Syracuse, New York. Hauptmann Klaus Weismann's fountain pen froze mid-sentence as he stared through the rain-streaked window of the passenger train. In his concealed journal, written in code that would mean court-martial if discovered, he had just inscribed words that felt like treason. Either we have been fed lies for 4 years, or this entire nation is an elaborate stage production designed to break our will. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What he witnessed defied every briefing, every propaganda film, every assurance from Berlin. A working-class neighborhood at 11:47 p.m. blazed with electric illumination as bright as midday. Not military installations, not government buildings, ordinary homes. Every window glowed. Street lamps lined every corner. Neon signs advertised restaurants still open at midnight. An entire city grid powered without rationing, without blackouts, without the darkness that had consumed the Reich since 1939. In Stuttgart, his hometown, families gathered around single candles. Electric use was rationed to 2 hours daily. Rural areas had seen no power since 1941. Yet here, in what Goebbels had called a nation on the verge of industrial collapse, electricity flowed so abundantly that Americans left lights burning in empty rooms. 2,340 veterans of the Wehrmacht's 334th Infantry Division descended from those Pullman coaches that night. Not cattle cars, not the 40 and 8 wagons that had transported them across Europe. Genuine passenger trains with cushioned seating, dining cars serving hot meals, and porters who treated prisoners with uncomfortable courtesy. These men, hardened by the Afrika Korps campaigns, survivors of El Alamein and Kasserine Pass, were about to experience a transformation more complete than any battlefield defeat. The arsenal of democracy wasn't just a propaganda slogan, it was a mathematical impossibility that somehow functioned, and these prisoners were about to witness every impossible aspect of it.
May 7th, 1943. The hills outside Tunis, Tunisia. General Lieutenant Heinrich von Arnim raised the white flag over what remained of Army Group Africa. Approximately 238,000 German and Italian soldiers laid down their weapons in the largest Axis surrender since Stalingrad. The Mediterranean campaign was over. The Afrika Korps, Rommel's legendary desert warriors who had driven the British to the edge of Egypt, now stood in prisoner columns that stretched for miles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Among them was Oberfeldwebel Ernst Kruger, a machine gunner from Bremen who had earned the Iron Cross at Taruk. His letters home, preserved in his family's archives and later donated to the Bundesarchiv, provide the most detailed first-hand account of what came next. "We expected execution," Kruger wrote 3 months later. "At minimum, we expected the brutality we had shown to Russian prisoners. What we received instead was the first crack in the foundation of everything we believed about our enemies." The British and American forces established massive POW processing centers at the port city of Bizerte. Kruger's unit was assigned to Camp Delta 7, a hastily erected facility that held 15,000 prisoners in tents and temporary barracks. The conditions were harsh: North African heat, overcrowding, limited shade. But the systematic processing revealed something unexpected: organization at a scale the Wehrmacht had never achieved. Every prisoner was photographed, fingerprinted, and medically examined within 72 hours. American and British medical personnel inoculated each man against typhoid, tetanus, and malaria. Dental examinations were conducted. Men with serious injuries or illnesses were transferred to hospital facilities. The entire operation processed thousands daily with assembly line precision. But it was the food that first destabilized their worldview. Lieutenant Stefan Hoffmann, a logistics officer who understood supply chains, couldn't reconcile what he observed. In our final 3 months in Tunisia, my company received 180 grams of bread daily when we were lucky, meat once per week. Here, as prisoners in an enemy camp, we received more food in a single day than we had eaten in the past month of fighting. The American field rations, C rations and K rations, contained more calories than Wehrmacht combat rations at the height of German power. Each prisoner received 3,200 calories daily: canned meat, crackers, chocolate, coffee, cigarettes, and chewing gum. Items like chocolate and real coffee had vanished from German supply lines in 1941. Yet here they were, given freely to captured enemies. Unteroffizier Walter Brandt, a former grocery clerk from Hamburg, kept detailed notes that survived the war. They threw away more food than they served us. Half-empty cans, uneaten portions, bread that had sat too long, all discarded into bins without thought. I watched an American sergeant stub out a cigarette after 3 puffs. These weren't special items rationed to troops. They were so common that waste meant nothing.
June 1943, Port of Bizerte to Norfolk, Virginia. The transport of POWs across the Atlantic represented a logistical achievement the prisoners couldn't fully grasp. Liberty ships and troop transports, having delivered men and material to the Mediterranean, returned to America with human cargo rather than sailing empty. At peak efficiency, the United States transported 35,000 German and Italian prisoners monthly across a submarine-infested ocean. Klaus Weismann's transport group of 4,200 men boarded the SS Samuel Chase, a Liberty ship completed just 4 months earlier at the Portland, Maine shipyard. The vessel itself was a testament to American industrial capacity that prisoners couldn't yet comprehend. Built in 41 days using prefabricated sections, the Chase was one of 2,751 Liberty ships constructed during the war, an average of 3 completed per day at the program's peak. The 14-day crossing provided the second phase of psychological transformation. Obergefreier Johann Becker, an engineering student before conscription, spent the voyage observing the ship's construction and operation. His technical drawings and notes preserved in the Imperial War Museum revealed the systematic mental breakdown of a trained engineer. "The quality of the welding alone surpasses our standards," Becker wrote. "Every joint, every seam built for rapid construction, yet stronger than ships we took months to build. The engine room operates with a skeleton crew, 3 men managing systems that would require 15 in our Navy. Everything is standardized, interchangeable, designed for mass production." The ship's American crew numbered 44, merchant mariners, not naval personnel. They operated the vessel with casual competence that disturbed the German military mind. No rigid hierarchy, no ceremonial protocols. Officers ate with enlisted men. Decisions were made through discussion rather than absolute command. Yet the ship ran flawlessly. "The crew complained about the food," wrote Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, a veteran of the French campaign. "They said the meat was tough, the vegetables overcooked, the coffee weak. They were dissatisfied with meals that exceeded anything available in German restaurants before the war. This casual dissatisfaction with abundance was more disturbing than any deprivation would have been." The ship's waste disposal pattern revealed the most psychologically damaging truth. Each day, garbage was collected and dumped overboard. Food waste, packaging, damaged equipment, items deemed too worn for continued use. Prisoners watching from the deck witnessed more resources thrown into the Atlantic than their units had received in weeks of combat. Lieutenant Stefan Hoffmann calculated quantities obsessively. "In 1 day's garbage, I counted enough wasted bread to feed my platoon for 2 days. Fruit that had bruised but remained edible, half-eaten meals scraped into the ocean. A crew member threw away an entire unopened can of meat because it was dented. In Germany, such waste would be criminal. Here, it was routine. As the ship approached American waters, men pressed against railings to catch their first glimpse of the enemy homeland. The U-boat threat had diminished significantly by summer 1943, but the crossing still required armed escorts. Prisoners watched as destroyers and corvettes maintained protective formations, vessels built in quantities that German intelligence had insisted were impossible. We counted 13 escort ships for our convoy of 8 transports, warships guarding cargo and prisoners, built so quickly and in such numbers that they could be deployed for non-critical missions. In the Kriegsmarine, every vessel was precious, irreplaceable. Here, they used cutting-edge destroyers to guard POWs.
August 18, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The harbor sprawled before them like an industrial nightmare. Klaus Weismann stood at the railing as the Samuel Chase entered port, his engineer's mind trying to process what he saw. The Norfolk facility covered 6,200 acres, larger than many German cities. Its docks extended for 11 miles. In a single hour of observation, Weismann counted 63 vessels in various stages of loading, unloading, or maintenance. The scale violated every understanding of industrial capacity. In Bremen, we had 4 major loading docks, Weismann wrote. This port had 47 visible from our ship alone. Each crane lifted tonnage that would require entire work crews in Germany. They moved electrically, smoothly, continuously. No coal smoke, no steam engines, pure electric power in quantities that seemed limitless. But the parking lots destroyed the last vestiges of propaganda credibility. Thousands of automobiles, private vehicles belonging to dock workers, filled acre after acre of paved lots. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained a privilege of the wealthy and party officials. The Volkswagen program, promised to German workers since 1934, had delivered fewer than 600 civilian vehicles before converting entirely to military production. Here, ordinary laborers, men in work clothes carrying lunch pails, drove their own cars to work. Unteroffizier Walter Brandt counted vehicles obsessively. 483 automobiles in the lot nearest our dock. I counted 3 times to be certain. Workers arriving for the evening shift. Regular workers, not officers or managers. Each one drove a private vehicle. The mathematics made no sense. If this was real, if ordinary workers owned cars, then every economic principle we'd been taught was false. The prisoners were formed into columns for transport to processing facilities. The march through the naval base provided an hours-long exposure to American capability that no propaganda preparation could have neutralized. They passed warehouses, dozens of them, each larger than anything most had seen. Mountains of supplies visible through open doors, machinery, tools, building materials, vehicles, rations. They marched past an aircraft assembly facility where wings and fuselages for Navy fighters covered acres of tarmac. They witnessed the Yorktown-class carrier USS Essex preparing for deployment, a vessel larger than any ship in the German Navy. We had been told American industry was weak, that their ships were inferior, their factories inefficient, their workers lazy. We saw the opposite at every turn. This was not propaganda. This was simply what existed. We were witnessing actual capability, not projected strength.
The passenger trains waiting at the Norfolk Military Rail Terminal were Pullman coaches, luxury transportation by any standard. Each car featured cushioned seats that converted to sleeping berths, overhead luggage racks, electric lighting, and forced air ventilation. For men who had crossed Europe in boxcars, the accommodations bordered on surreal. 2,340 prisoners boarded 9 passenger trains that evening. The journey to Camp Clarion in central Pennsylvania would take 19 hours. Those 19 hours would accomplish more psychological transformation than months of combat. As darkness fell and the trains rolled north through Virginia, the illumination began. Every town blazed with electric light, not just main streets. Every residential block, every farm they passed, every crossroad displayed the same abundance of electricity. Richmond glowed like a constellation.
Fredericksburg shimmered in the distance. Even tiny communities too small to appear on maps demonstrated rural electrification that Germany had never achieved. "I pressed my face to the window like a child," wrote Johann Becker. "We passed a farmhouse at midnight. Every room was lit. The barn had electric lights. The yard had a lamppost. This was not a wealthy estate. I could see the modest size, the working farm equipment. Yet they had more electricity than my grandfather's entire village." The trains passed factories running night shifts, steel mills, textile plants, manufacturing facilities operating at full capacity. Each one displayed the casual use of electricity that marked unlimited power generation. Parking lots full at 2 a.m., lights blazing from every window, electric signs advertising 3 shifts of employment. Obergefreiter Martin Schaefer, an electrical worker from Frankfurt before the war, understood the implications. "A single textile mill we passed in North Carolina used more electrical power than my entire district in Frankfurt, 15,000 homes and businesses. And this was just one factory among hundreds. The power generation required to support this level of industrial activity exceeded Germany's total capacity." But the prisoners were only seeing the visible portion. What they couldn't know: America's electrical generating capacity in 1943 was 156,000 megawatts compared to Germany's 41,000. American homes consumed 1,390 kilowatt-hours annually compared to Germany's 320. Rural electrification had reached 94% of American farms by 1943, while German rural electrification remained below 25%. The train stopped in Washington, D.C. for refueling at 4 a.m. The prisoners remained aboard, but the illuminated Capitol building visible in the distance provided another psychological blow. The building blazed with floodlights, pure display, no functional purpose, just aesthetic illumination, consuming more electricity than most German cities. They illuminated their government buildings for beauty, not necessity, not security, simply because they could, because power was so abundant that waste for aesthetic purposes meant nothing. This casual attitude toward resources was more disturbing than any weapon.
August 20th, 1943. Camp Clarion, Pennsylvania. The camp sprawled across 640 acres of former farmland in central Pennsylvania. Constructed in just 117 days by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Clarion could house 4,800 prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians in Germany. The prisoners marched through gates expecting deprivation. What they found instead was infrastructure that challenged every assumption about temporary military construction. 60 barracks buildings, each housing 80 men in double-deck bunks. Every building wired for electricity with overhead lighting and wall outlets. Every building heated by a central coal-fired steam system. Running water, hot and cold, available in washrooms attached to each barracks. Flush toilets, shower facilities with hot water on demand. "The barracks were built better than my family's house in Bremen," wrote Ernst Kruger. "Solid wooden construction, insulated walls, proper windows with screens, wooden floors. We had been told to expect tents or crude shelters. Instead, we received housing that workers in Germany would have considered luxurious." The camp hospital astounded German medical personnel. Oberstabsarzt Dr. Friedrich Richter, former chief surgeon of the 334th Infantry Division's medical battalion, found himself in a facility that exceeded German civilian hospitals. They had X-ray equipment, Dr. Richter recorded in his official report, later preserved in U.S. military archives, modern surgical instruments, pharmaceutical supplies that had been unavailable in German military hospitals since 1942, sulfa drugs in abundance, and something called penicillin, an antibiotic we had only heard rumors about, that used it on prisoners with routine infections. The camp kitchen completed the demolition of expectations. Industrial equipment, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, walk-in refrigerators, gas ranges designed for mass feeding.
The facility could prepare meals for 5,000 men using a staff of 40, an efficiency ratio impossible in German field kitchens. The daily ration was published on a board outside the mess hall. 3,500 calories, including fresh meat, 220 grams, fresh vegetables, milk, 1 pint, eggs, 4 per week, white bread, unlimited, butter, cheese, and coffee. Quantities that German civilians hadn't seen since 1938. Feldwebel Otto Schreiber, a former restaurant cook from Munich, was assigned to kitchen duty. His diary entries, discovered by his grandson in 2003, revealed the psychological impact on men who understood food systems. We received our weekly supply delivery today. 15 trucks arrived from regional warehouses. They unloaded 8,000 pounds of beef, 4,000 pounds of pork, 12,000 pounds of potatoes, 6,000 dozen eggs, 800 gallons of milk for 4,200 prisoners for 1 week. This was more food than my restaurant received in 3 months before the war. But worse, much worse, was the waste. American regulations required us to prepare 10% extra to ensure adequate portions. The surplus couldn't be saved due to safety regulations. We threw away 400 pounds of perfectly edible food today. I wept as I scraped beef stew into garbage bins. In Germany, people were starving. Here, we discarded excess as routine policy.
By the end of their first week at Camp Clarion, the prisoners had begun to fracture psychologically. The most fanatical Nazis maintained that this was elaborate propaganda, that they were being held in a showcase camp while the rest of America starved. But this theory couldn't survive contact with evidence. American guards rotated through the camp every 2 weeks, fresh personnel from various states. Each rotation brought men who casually discussed their home lives, lives that matched everything the prisoners were witnessing. They spoke of multiple family cars, homes with electricity and running water, children who attended free public schools, wives who shopped in supermarkets full of food. The guards weren't actors. They were ordinary Americans serving military duty, unaware that their casual comments about normal life were destroying Nazi ideology more effectively than any propaganda program. Lieutenant Klaus Weismann, whose initial skepticism had been absolute, found his certainty eroding. I interviewed 23 guards from 16 states. I asked detailed questions about their homes, their families, their communities. Every story matched, every detail aligned. Either this was the most elaborate deception in human history, involving millions of actors maintaining perfect consistency, or it was simply true. I began to suspect the latter. And if it was true, then everything, absolutely everything we had been told about America was a lie. And if that was a lie, what else had we been lied to about? The camp library offered another vector of truth. American authorities provided books, magazines, and newspapers without censorship. Prisoners could read Life magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, local Pennsylvania newspapers, and even German-language publications from before the war. The advertisements in magazines proved more destructive than any editorial. They showed ordinary American products available to ordinary people: automobiles, refrigerators, washing machines, radios, cameras, furniture, clothing. Not luxury items for the wealthy, but mass-market products advertised to middle-class consumers. The advertisements assumed prosperity, noted Johann Becker. They weren't selling dreams to desperate people. They were competing for the dollars of customers who already had options. This fundamental assumption that ordinary people had discretionary income to spend on competing products revealed an economy operating at a level we couldn't comprehend. September 1943, the acute labor shortage in American agriculture forced a decision that would accelerate the psychological transformation of German prisoners.
POWs would be employed in fields, forests, and factories across the nation, traveling daily through the American heartland without blindfolds or restrictions. The first labor detachments departed Camp Clarion on September 15, 1943. Groups of 50 to 200 prisoners were assigned to farms, lumber operations, and food processing facilities within a 100-mile radius. Each morning, trucks carried them to work sites. Each evening, they returned with more evidence that contradicted 4 years of Nazi indoctrination. Obergefreiter Martin Schaefer found himself assigned to a dairy farm outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The owner, Jacob Morrison, was a third-generation farmer operating 400 acres with his 2 sons and hired help. What Schaefer witnessed there destroyed his understanding of agricultural economics. The Morrison farm had electricity, Schaefer recorded, not from a generator, from the rural grid. Electric milking machines processed 60 cows in the time it would take 10 men by hand. Electric pumps, electric lights in the barn, electric refrigeration for milk storage. The entire operation was mechanized beyond anything I had seen in Germany. But more disturbing was the casual wealth. Morrison owned 3 tractors, not one aging machine, but 3 modern implements. His 16-year-old son drove a truck to transport milk cans. The family's house had running water, indoor plumbing, a telephone, and a radio in every room. This was not a wealthy estate. This was a normal American family farm. The Morrisons treated their German laborers with practical kindness that confused men trained to expect hatred. Mrs. Morrison packed lunches for the prisoners, sandwiches with meat, fruit, cookies, thermoses of coffee. The portions exceeded German civilian rations. When Schaefer mentioned this, she looked puzzled and asked if he wanted more. She didn't understand, Schaefer wrote. To her, this was a normal lunch. She couldn't comprehend that in Germany, such food would be a feast. Her confusion revealed the gulf between our worlds more clearly than any speech about American abundance. In Wisconsin, Unteroffizier Henrik Fischer worked at a cheese processing facility near Madison. The plant produced 40,000 pounds of cheese daily using equipment that operated with minimal human intervention. Automated pasteurizers, mechanized cutting and packaging systems, refrigerated storage that could hold a month's production. The plant manager showed us the facility with pride, Fischer recorded. He explained how they had increased production by 60% in 2 years while reducing staff by 20%. Women operated most of the machinery, middle-aged women who had replaced men gone to military service. They worked 8-hour shifts, received wages that exceeded what German skilled workers earned, and went home to houses with electricity and automobiles. The mathematics made no sense according to Nazi economic theory. Women workers, racial diversity in the workforce, democratic labor practices, all things we were told would weaken industrial production. Yet this plant alone produced more cheese in a week than my entire region of Bavaria produced in a year.
October 1943 brought the fall harvest, and with it, the most devastating evidence of American agricultural capacity. German prisoners worked across the Midwest, witnessing productivity that defied comprehension. In Iowa, Feldwebel Otto Schreiber joined a corn harvest operation near Des Moines. The farm stretched 2,800 acres, larger than many German villages. A single mechanical harvester, operated by one man, processed more corn in an hour than 50 workers could harvest manually in a day. I watched the machine move through fields that reached the horizon, Schreiber wrote. Behind it, corn fell into wagons that trucks hauled to storage elevators. The farmer told me his yield was 75 bushels per acre, nearly double the best German farms, and this was average for Iowa, not exceptional, average. The storage elevator could hold 500,000 bushels. The operator said it would be full in 3 weeks, then they would fill another. He spoke casually of quantities that could feed my hometown for 5 years. And there were dozens of these elevators across every county. The surplus shocked prisoners more than the abundance. In Nebraska,
Gefreiter Paul Richter watched as farmers plowed under soybean fields because prices had dropped. Perfectly harvestable crops destroyed to maintain market stability. The concept violated everything prisoners understood about resource management. In Germany, every potato was precious. Every grain of wheat was allocated and rationed. Here, they destroyed food to prevent prices from falling too low. They had so much that surplus became a problem rather than shortage. This abundance was more disturbing than any deprivation could be. Lieutenant Klaus Weismann, now working at a grain cooperative in Illinois, spent his evenings calculating agricultural statistics. His engineering training demanded answers to impossible questions. American wheat production in 1943, 840 million bushels. German production at our peak, 160 million bushels. American corn production, 3 billion bushels. Germany produced no significant corn. American meat production, 24 billion pounds. Germany production, 4 billion pounds. These weren't projections or propaganda. These were real numbers from agricultural reports I could verify through observation. America was producing 5 times more food than Germany while feeding Britain, the Soviet Union, and their own military across 2 oceans. The scale was incomprehensible.
December 1943 delivered the emotional climax of the prisoners' transformation. American civilian organizations, churches, and community groups sent care packages to German POWs, enemies who months earlier had been trying to kill American soldiers. At Camp Clarion, 4,200 packages arrived between December 15th and December 24th. Each contained cigarettes, candy, toiletries, playing cards, and handwritten Christmas greetings. Local Pennsylvania communities contributed cookies, cakes, and hand-knit items. The Harrisburg Methodist Church Choir performed Christmas carols in German. Children from nearby schools sent handmade cards. Ernst Kruger, whose brother had been killed at Stalingrad, found himself weeping as he opened a package from a widow in Philadelphia whose son had died at Kasserine Pass, killed fighting Germans. Her note was simple. Even in war, Christ's love compels us to remember all God's children. May you find peace this Christmas and return safely to your family. This kindness from an enemy whose son we killed, Kruger wrote. She showed more Christian charity than our own party ever demonstrated toward fellow Germans. What manner of people treats enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of their power and secure in their righteousness. The Christmas feast itself shattered final illusions. The menu, preserved in camp records, roast turkey, 8 ounces per man, glazed ham, 4 ounces, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, dinner rolls with butter, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, ice cream, coffee, and oranges. We ate like the Führer's personal guests, recorded Obergefreiter Johann Becker. Better than German generals, better than party officials. And the guards told us this was a standard American Christmas dinner. Every family across America was eating the same meal. If they could feed prisoners this extravagantly, what abundance did their own people enjoy? Dr. Friedrich Richter, the camp's senior German medical officer, observed the psychological impact of the holiday. Many men wept openly, not from homesickness alone, but from the collapse of their worldview. They had been raised to believe Germans were the master race, destined to rule inferior peoples. Yet here they were, treated with more dignity by inferior Americans than they had ever been treated by their own government. The cognitive dissonance was crushing.
June 6, 1944. News of the Normandy invasion reached Camp Clarion through radio broadcasts and newspaper extras. The scale of Operation Overlord, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 156,000 men in the first day, demonstrated Allied organizational capacity that exceeded German capabilities at the height of their power. American guards brought newspapers showing aerial photographs of the invasion fleet. Prisoners gathered in the mess hall to hear radio reports. The artificial mulberry harbors, the logistics of supplying 150,000 men across open beaches, the coordination of multinational forces, every detail revealed American industrial and organizational supremacy. "We knew then that Germany had lost," wrote Feldwebel Otto Schreiber. "Not just the battle, not just the war, but the entire contest of systems. Democratic capitalism had proven superior to Nazi totalitarianism in every measurable way. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with mythology and racial theory. The outcome was inevitable." Obergefreiter Martin Schaefer, whose faith in German victory had survived Kasserine Pass and capture, finally accepted reality. "I calculated the numbers obsessively. America built 300,000 aircraft during the war. Germany built 120,000. America produced 88,000 tanks. Germany produced 24,000. American shipyards launched one Liberty ship every day. German yards took months to build vessels half the size. These weren't estimates. These were facts I could verify through observation and documentation. We had been told America was weak, divided, controlled by inferior races. Every day in captivity proved those claims were lies. And if those were lies, what else had we been told that was false? The question haunted us all. April 1945 brought the final demolition of any remaining German pride. As American forces liberated concentration camps across Germany and Poland, newsreel footage was shown to German POWs at Camp Clarion. The first screening occurred on April 20, 1945, ironically Hitler's birthday. American officers assembled the prisoners in the camp theater and projected films from Buchenwald, Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen. The initial reaction was denial. Many prisoners insisted the footage was propaganda, that such atrocities were impossible, that the Allies had staged these scenes to justify their cause. But the evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from American soldiers, British liberators, medical reports, and soon letters from Germany confirming the horror. Ernst Kruger, who had maintained some pride in German military honor despite defeat, wrote of his psychological collapse. "I sat in that theater and watched the films from Buchenwald. Mountains of corpses, living skeletons who were barely human, gas chambers disguised as shower rooms, crematoria that had burned thousands. I vomited. Many men vomited. Others wept. Some sat in stunned silence. We had fought for this? We had believed in leaders who built such places? Every sacrifice, every wound, every moment of courage, all in service of criminals. We were not warriors. We were accomplices." Dr. Friedrich Richter's medical training forced him to confront the evidence clinically. "As a physician, I could not deny what the film showed. The stages of starvation were unmistakable. The typhus, the dysentery, the diseases of malnutrition, all medically verifiable. And the gas chambers, the Zyklon B canisters, the engineering of industrial murder. German doctors had participated in this, members of my profession. I had taken the Hippocratic Oath. I had sworn to heal. Yet German medicine had been perverted into instruments of genocide. My shame was complete." The revelation split the prisoners into groups. Hardcore Nazis, perhaps 5% of the camp, maintained their beliefs through denial and conspiracy theories. Another 10% retreated into silence, unable to process the information. But the majority, 85% of prisoners, experienced genuine transformation. Their letters home, monitored by American censors, reflected this change. "We were lied to," wrote Gefreiter Paul Richter to his wife in Munich.
Everything we believed was false. The party led us into a criminal war for criminal purposes. America showed us what civilization actually means. They treat us better than our own government ever did. When Germany is rebuilt, it must be on American principles: democracy, freedom, human dignity. The Nazi way led to hell.
Repatriation began in January 1946. Groups of 500 prisoners departed Camp Clarion weekly, transported to New York and Boston for Atlantic crossings back to Europe. The journey reversed their arrival 2 to 3 years earlier, but the men traveling home bore little resemblance to the soldiers who had arrived. Ernst Kruger's final diary entry at Camp Clarion, dated February 3, 1946, captured the transformation. I arrived in America as a Nazi, a believer in German superiority and the Führer's vision. I depart as a Democrat who has seen how free people prosper. I came expecting punishment. I received education. I expected hatred. I found humanity. America defeated us not just militarily, but ideologically. They showed us a better way through example rather than coercion. I returned to Germany with knowledge of how democratic societies function, how free markets create prosperity, how treating workers with dignity increases productivity. These lessons will shape the new Germany. The ships carrying repatriates arrived at Bremerhaven in Hamburg to find Germany destroyed beyond recognition, cities reduced to rubble, factories demolished, infrastructure collapsed, millions homeless and starving. The contrast with America could not have been more complete. Yet the returning POWs brought something precious: knowledge, skills, and democratic principles learned in captivity. They became agents of transformation in occupied Germany.
The German POWs who experienced American prosperity became instrumental in West Germany's reconstruction. Their influence permeated every sector of post-war society. Friedrich Weismann, Klaus's younger brother, also held at Camp Clarion, rose to become Director of Industrial Development in Bavaria. He implemented American manufacturing techniques learned as a prisoner, revolutionizing German factory production. His policies emphasized worker dignity, quality control, and continuous innovation, principles observed in American factories. Everything I implemented came from lessons learned at Camp Clarion and through work programs in America, Weismann wrote in his 1967 memoir. The economic miracle was built on American methods brought home by former prisoners. Ernst Kruger became an agricultural advisor in Lower Saxony, introducing American farming techniques that transformed German agricultural productivity. Mechanization, crop rotation systems, and rural electrification programs all reflected knowledge gained in Iowa and Pennsylvania. Werner Braun, former editor of the Camp newspaper, became a prominent journalist and advocate for democratic institutions. His newspaper, The Neue Demokratie, championed constitutional government, free press, and civil rights throughout the 1950s. Dr. Friedrich Richter returned to medical practice but dedicated himself to medical ethics education. He taught at the University of Heidelberg, ensuring future German physicians understood the moral obligations of their profession and the horrors that occurred when medicine served totalitarianism.
September 1987. Camp Clarion, Pennsylvania, now a state historical site. On the 44th anniversary of their arrival, 287 former prisoners returned to America for a reunion. They came from across West Germany, bringing families to show them where their transformation had begun. Some were accompanied by American families they had corresponded with for 4 decades. The reunion dinner was held in the restored camp mess hall. Former prisoners, now elderly men, mingled with American veterans who had served as guards. Former enemies embraced as friends. Obergefreiter Martin Schaefer, now 73 and a successful dairy farmer in Bavaria, delivered the opening remarks. "We came to America as enemies, as believers in a monstrous ideology. We left as students of democracy. The 3 years I spent at Camp Clarion and working on American farms taught me more than any university. I learned that prosperity comes from freedom, that diversity is strength, that treating people with dignity creates loyalty more powerful than fear ever could. I returned to Germany and built a farm modeled on the Morrison farm in Pennsylvania. I implemented every technique I learned. My farm became one of the most productive in Bavaria. But more importantly, I raised my children to value democracy, freedom, and human rights. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on principles we learned as prisoners in America." Ernst Kruger, now 79, stood with difficulty to address the gathering. "I lost my brother at Stalingrad. I fought in Africa, believing I served a noble cause. Discovery of the concentration camps destroyed that belief and nearly destroyed me. But America gave me a second chance. They educated me. They showed me a better way. They sent me home equipped to build a democratic Germany. My children grew up in a free, prosperous, democratic nation allied with the United States. That alliance was built on transformations like mine, enemy soldiers who witnessed American strength and were changed by American humanity. We who came as conquerors left as students. Thank you, America, from your former enemies, now your grateful friends." The evening concluded with the American and German national anthems played by a combined orchestra. Former prisoners and guards stood together, many weeping openly, united in the recognition of an extraordinary transformation.
The German POW experience in America can be measured in stark statistics that reveal both the scale and success of the program. Camp Clarion specific data. Total prisoners held, 4,847 between August 1943 and December 1945. Escape attempts, 34.7% of population, all recaptured within 48 hours. 0 American civilians harmed. Educational enrollment, 3,247 prisoners, or 67%. Vocational training graduates, 1,856. University correspondence courses, 412 prisoners. Labor contributions from Camp Clarion prisoners, 2.4 million man-hours of agricultural labor, 18 million board feet of lumber processed, $4.2 million in labor value, 1940s dollars. Critical support to 147 Pennsylvania farms. Employment in 23 food processing facilities. Post-war assessment. 96% rated treatment as good or excellent. 78% reported captivity positively influenced their worldview. 67% expressed interest in democratic principles. Less than 4% maintained Nazi beliefs by 1946. 843 maintained regular correspondence with American families through the 1980s. Long-term impact. 127 former Camp Clarion prisoners eventually immigrated to United States. 89 returned as business partners with American companies. 234 sent their children to American universities. Dozens rose to prominence in West German Reconstruction. The story of German POWs in America transcends simple historical narrative. It represents one of the most successful psychological transformation programs in modern history, accomplished not through coercion but through observation. The prisoners arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness. They encountered overwhelming evidence of the opposite. Every full meal, every electric light, every modern convenience, every act of kindness from enemies, each one was an argument against Nazi ideology more powerful than any propaganda could be. Klaus Weismann, in his final interview before his death in 1992, summarized the experience. "We thought we understood power. We believed might came from military strength, from racial purity, from totalitarian control. America taught us that true power comes from freedom, that prosperity grows from democracy, that diverse people working together achieve more than any master race fantasy ever could. I spent 3 years as a prisoner in America. Those were the 3 most educational years of my life. I witnessed the arsenal of democracy at peak production, not just weapons, but ideas, values, systems that created unlimited abundance. I learned that America's secret weapon wasn't its bombs or tanks, but its fundamental belief in human dignity and potential. I returned to Germany as a missionary for democracy. We rebuilt our nation on American principles. The West Germany that emerged from the ruins was democratic, prosperous, and allied with America, a partnership built on transformations like mine. The German POWs were stunned by American industrial might, overwhelmed by American abundance, and ultimately converted by American humanity. They returned home not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to what free people could achieve. In their transformation lay the foundation for transatlantic alliance, European reconstruction, and the democratic Germany that emerged from Nazi ruins. They had seen the future in America, and they returned home determined to build it in Germany. The prisoners who arrived at Camp Clarion in August 1943 were warriors of a failed ideology. The men who departed in 1946 were architects of democracy. Their journey from Nazi soldiers to democratic citizens remains one of history's most remarkable transformations. Proof that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration of a better way.